the land on which you lie, I will give it to you and your descendants. Your descendants will also be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. That pretty much covers everything. And in you and all your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. So the most interesting thing to me is the timing of this dream. Anybody remember how old Jacob is at this point? Roughly 80. He's 80 years old, and this is the first recorded incident that we have of God actually speaking to Jacob. And he shares the promise, both of the land, saying he's going to bring them back, and he's going to be a great company of people. He's going to spread north, south, east, west. But he also shares the promise of Christ. Remember, he says, all the families of the world will be blessed through you and your descendants. Now, this comes directly, likely hours after Isaac has given Jacob the blessing of Abraham. So it's almost like, to me, God is just waiting for Isaac to finally cue Jacob in on this. I'm sure it's not true, but picture God up in heaven saying, finally, I can now talk to Jacob, the next one in the line. He's just kind of almost waiting for Isaac to give him the inroad there, because seemingly he appears to Jacob in a dream hours after getting the blessing of Abraham, kind of getting the go-ahead. So Jacob, he takes the rock that he's sleeping on, sets it up as a memorial, and he asks God to give him safety and to allow him to return home. Well, God's already said he's going to do that, so yeah, I think that's going to be granted to him. And he promises to give God a tenth of what he has. Now, I'm not exactly sure how he was going to do that. I mean, it's not like he can write a check and put it in the offering plate. It's not like he can give a tenth of all his livestock to the Levites. We're not in that era yet. Not sure how he's going to give a tenth to God, but somehow he's going to do it. Sacrifice, perhaps. Not exactly sure. If anybody knows, you can fill me in after the lesson, because I'd like to know. So he sets up that memorial, continues north, and that closes out chapter 28 of Genesis. Questions, thoughts, comments? All right, chapter 29. So it starts with Jacob making it to the approximate area of where he's heading. Now remember, there's no road signs, there's no really roads for that matter at all. There's no GPS, and the people that he's looking for really aren't guaranteed to be there anyway. The family that he's going to doesn't appear to be nomadic, they appear to be settled, but there's still no guarantee that they're actually there. Maybe they moved because of drought, maybe conflict. We also have no record of Jacob ever visiting his family, so he's probably just heading on the directions of, his mother, and we know how directions from women are anyway. But it's been 100 years, and she's been there. And he gets to the area. Losing my place. All right. And he comes upon a well with 3 groups of sheep. The well has a large stone over it, likely to keep out the debris, animals, and other people. Because if you dug a well, you own the water in it, you really don't want people coming stealing your water. So there's a large stone over it. It's likely that the stone couldn't be moved by just one person, so you'd have to wait until several of the groups came together. Then you've got several individuals that can kind of move this stone, and then you can draw the water together for the flocks. Jacob essentially asked to the people, where am I? Am I even in the right area? Because that's the only way you're going to figure it out. You can't look at a map, can't look at a sign, you've just got to ask somebody. They tell him that he's in Haran, the place that he's looking for. He's probably pretty excited. How many people do you think he asked that said he wasn't in Haran before? Probably a few. I doubt he just goes there directly and the first person he asked to, I'm there, maybe. And he asks if they know Laban, if he's still alive. They say yes. He's probably even more excited. And then they say, oh, by the way, that's his daughter Rachel right now coming with more sheep. He is probably relieved and very happy just to be there. He's got family. He knows where he's going. So Jacob, he helps roll the stone away. He greets Rachel, tells her who he is. If you read, there's a lot of emotion, crying, hugging, good stuff there, if you want to read through that. She runs off to tell Daddy, Laban, guess what? My long-lost cousin that I didn't even know existed is here. Start preparing for supper, basically. Laban, if you look, he's pretty excited too. He brings Jacob into the house. Jacob stays for a month. After that, apparently Jacob has been working for Laban without pay, so Laban does the honorable thing and says, I need to pay you. What would you like for wages? Jacob eyes up his two cousins. Leah's probably, so-so in the looks department. Rachel, he likes Rachel. Rachel's the younger one. He finds her very pleasing. He says, I'll work 7 years to marry your daughter Rachel. Laban's thinking, I've got free labor. He says yes, he agrees to it. Verse 19, I love Laban's response here. He said, it is better that I give her to you than give her to another man. This isn't your, I'm so happy you're going to be my son-in-law. You're going to be a great husband to my daughter. It's, hey, you're probably better than the next guy that's going to wander over the hill. I mean, it's just, you can feel the love here, the bond. So they make this deal. Jacob works 7 years, and then he has to go tell Laban that, hey, I've kept my end of the deal. Basically, I want my wife. I don't blame him. I waited 3 years to marry Melissa, and that kind of felt like forever. So he waited 7 years to marry Rachel. He says, I fulfilled our agreement. I want to get married. Laban agrees that Jacob's met the terms of the agreement, and he throws a wedding feast. Now, I'm guessing that Leah just wasn't getting too many offers. That's what I'm picking up. Because Laban decides to pull a fast one and slip Leah in Rachel's place. Who's the older? Leah. The younger is Rachel. That's going to come into play in a couple minutes. So he decides to pass it off and secretly make Jacob marry Leah instead of Rachel. Now, I'm not an expert on ancient Jewish wedding feasts. I will never claim to be. But I'm guessing there were veils involved. When they came together at night, it was probably very dark because Jacob doesn't discover the switch until morning. Has anybody thought where Rachel was during the feast? Has that ever crossed your mind? Was she locked in a room somewhere? Was she the perfectly obedient daughter? Disguised herself at the feast? Where's Rachel?
Out with the sheep.
Out with the sheep, very possible. But you have to wonder, where was she? Just an interesting thought. Or has anyone really thought of how Leah feels about all this? It's kind of sad when you think about it. She gets to experience the deep love that Jacob had for Rachel for one night. She gets to be Rachel, the love of Jacob's life, for one night. What's she wake up to? Her husband, very, very upset that he married her. I mean, you've got to feel for both of these women in this case. I mean, Laban did a pretty bad thing here. I mean, he's the girl's father, and he did this to both of them. All right, so Laban, he's prepared for Jacob's anger. I mean, naturally, he knows Jacob's going to figure out what he did. So the next morning, when Jacob comes to him very angry, he simply notes that it's not the custom for you to marry the younger daughter first. I thought you would have known this, Jacob. It's really your fault, Jacob. It's kind of how the attitude that you get from Laban here. But Laban has a solution. What's that? Work another 7 years for the next daughter, too. Now, you can see a pattern of Laban really taking advantage of Jacob, but Jacob agrees to the terms. He goes through the rest of the ceremony. My guess would be somewhere around a week long based on my very limited study. Somebody could correct me on that. And then he's allowed to marry Rachel, who the Bible says was loved more than Leah. All right, one other thing to note are the wedding gifts that they get from their father. Leah and Rachel were both giving their maids, Zilpah and Bilpah. Now, before they were married, Leah and Rachel, even though they're the daughters of Laban, they are essentially servants in the house. Now they're married, they have their own household to attend to, they have their own servants, they become a household unto themselves. And as we know, and we'll find out in a few minutes if you don't, the maids are going to become even more important in the household here in a couple minutes. All right, so now we can complete one family tree that we've been working on. Chris, where you see the marriage lines now to Jacob between Leah and Rachel. So, everybody kind of remember where we started with? Terah was the father of Abraham, who was the father of Isaac, who remarried Rebekah, who was the daughter of Bethuel, who was the son of Nahor and Milcah. Obviously, Rebekah marries Isaac. They have Jacob and Esau. Jacob now marries Leah and Rachel. So we have a very nice, kind of twisted in one way, family tree. Yes, family circle, if you would say. All right, so now we are going to start our next family tree. Chris? All right, so now we have Jacob as the head with Leah and Rachel. It's not going to take very long for the family to start adding some more names, because in verses 31 and 35 of chapter 29, we see that God allowed Leah to begin having children first because he saw that she was unloved. God had pity, mercy, whatever you want to call it, for Leah. She starts having children. Now, not having children at this time, that was a pretty big deal. So this would have given Leah, who was not as loved, a higher standing in the family because she had children, especially in this case, she's going to have boys. Jacob probably wants to be around his sons, so he's probably going to even spend more time with Leah than what he used to do. Probably would be with Rachel most of the time. And then she has, Chris, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah as the first four sons. I have started naming them or numbering them so you can keep them straight a little bit later. Then she stops having children, but now the competition is on between the sisters for the children. Chapter 30 starts off with the predictable outcome of Rachel being jealous. So what does she tell Jacob at the end of verse 1? Give me children or else I die. How many times have we heard this phrase from women in Genesis already? At least a few. She tells it to Jacob. Rachel is probably exaggerating, but have you also thought that she might be telling the truth? I mean, she's very upset at this point. As I said, her not being able to have the children as the favored wife, she's now losing time from her husband. She's probably very depressed. Is it possible that she was threatening to actually do something to herself? You don't really know. Maybe it's not as much as an exaggeration as we think. Either way, the Bible says that Jacob clearly loved Rachel more, so I'm sure that they are, how do I put this delicately, expressing their love in the way married couples do. So what do you think Jacob's reaction to Rachel's demand of give her children is? Look in verse 2. Jacob's anger burned against Rachel. And he said, am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? I'm sure he's saying, I'm trying. He may have also made the mistake of pointing to her sister and say, look, clearly I'm not the problem. Probably didn't go well if he did, but I can also see him doing that. Interestingly enough, though, what he says here is his acknowledgement by Jacob that who is in control? God. So we start to see a stronger faith of Jacob through some of these interactions. He realizes that we can do whatever we want as people, but ultimately God is in control of all creation. He is the creator. If he decides that we're not going to have children, we're not having children. Rachel seems to let Jacob off the hook, but she has another idea that we've seen before. What's that? give my maid to my husband and everything's going to work out wonderfully. That's not exactly going to happen. Okay, do you think Bilhah has any say in this? I seriously doubt it. But what do you think her reaction was when she was told, hey, you're marrying Jacob, the head of our household? Do you think she was upset about it? I don't think so. I think she was probably pretty excited about this because suddenly she's going to go from a servant with nothing up to a wife, although we're going to find out a second-class wife, of the leader of their family group. So I don't think we can really say, poor Bilhah, this is horrible, she did it against her will, or was forced to do it. My thought is she's probably pretty happy when this came up. But either way, Jacob goes along with the plan, big mistake, and they have two sons that Rachel names, not Bilhah, Rachel is going to name, Chris, Dan and Naphtali. So there we have sons 5 and 6. Okay, these boys, they're the sons of Bilhah, but they would have basically, I think, had two mothers. Rachel's going to claim them as her own and probably would have had the final authority over any major decisions in their life. But my suspicion is, and it's totally my thought, that most of the actual mothering probably came from Bilhah. If you picture kind of the old English aristocracy where you had the actual DNA parents that would see their kids for 2 hours in the afternoon, but all the actual parenting was done by, the maids, the nurses. That's kind of what I get in my mind. Rachel claimed them, had final authority, but Bilhah is really more of the mother figure for them. All right, now Leah is going to feel behind in the standings, and since she's not having any more kids, she takes a page out of Rachel's book and gives her maid Zilpah to Jacob as his 4th wife. All right, they have 2 more boys that, again, Leah, not Zilpah, Leah names Gad and Asher. Perfect timing, love it. All right, so now Jacob is up to 8 sons and 4 wives. Here we go. All right, verse 14. Reuben's in the field, he's the oldest, and he finds some mandrakes, and he brings them home. So what is a mandrake? Chris? That is a mandrake, just in case you've ever read this verse and really wanted to know what a picture was. It's a root plant, grows around the Mediterranean region. It looks like it would be good to eat, but both the leaves and the roots are actually toxic to human beings. Eating them can cause blurred vision, headaches, vomiting, and diarrhea. It can also cause hallucinations and hyperactivity. Say that again, blurred vision, headaches, vomiting, and diarrhea, and hallucinations. That's what eating this thing will do to you. It was used in those days as an anesthetic and to induce unconsciousness prior to surgery. That was one of its uses. 2, as a topical ointment for chronic pain, pain reliever. Internally, to treat depression. I guess as long as the hallucinations are happy, you're good. And then 4, the one you've been waiting for, it was also known as the love plant, with the thought that it would somehow make people more open to intimate relations. Now, none of these symptoms that I went over sound pleasant to me in any regard, but especially not when I'm alone with my wife. I'm just throwing it out there. So you can use your own judgment what Rachel's ultimate use for the mandrakes are going to be, but we know the deal that Rachel is going to make for the mandrakes that Reuben finds and brings in. She asks her sister for some and gets the snippy response of verse 15. Is it a small matter for you to take my husband? No grudges being held here. And would you take my son's mandrakes also? Well, Rachel really wants these things for whatever reason. So what does she offer? A night with Jacob. Now, it's likely that Rachel and Leah have their own separate structures where they and their children would stay independent of each other. But it seems that Jacob primarily stayed with Rachel. We know that the Bible says he loved Rachel more, so he probably wanted to spend more time with her. Maybe she just has less kids and he wants to sleep more at night. Don't really know, but he seems like he stays there more. Rachel is saying, give me some mandrakes. I will let you have him for a night. Leah agrees to the arrangement. Rachel gets her mandrakes. So when Jacob comes back to camp, Leah meets him and says, I have hired you for the night with my son's mandrakes. What's the result, Chris? Issachar. Number 9. After this, without all the drama, Leah eventually has another son named Zebulun, and then the only daughter of Jacob that's mentioned in the Bible, Dinah. We're on a wavelength here. Now, it's possible that Jacob had other daughters. We can't say for certain one way or the other. It's possible that the only reason Dinah is being mentioned here is because she becomes a big part of the story that we'll get to a little bit later in Genesis, but we do know that he had at least one daughter. So the score is Leah, 6, Bilhah, 2, Zilpah, 2, and Rachel, 0. Finally, we learn in verse 22 that God remembered Rachel and allowed her to conceive, and she has a son that she names Joseph. All right, so Jacob's family is getting pretty big at this point, and he's been away from home for how long? 7 plus 7, 14 years. So Jacob asked Laban to send him away with his wives and his children. Now Jacob has pretty much become a part of Laban's household at this point. So you got to remember, in this day and age, the leader of the family group really has the final authority. Jacob's group is really large enough for him to kind of break out on his own. We'll see that a little bit later. But it's only proper for Jacob to ask permission before he just leaves. He really, ethically, through the culture, can't do that. Laban seems to realize this, and he really doesn't want Jacob to leave anyway, because he understands that God has blessed Laban because of Jacob's talents. Jacob's the one that's going to be in charge of a lot of his property, a lot of his possessions. They're multiplying. Laban realizes God's influence in all this. He doesn't want Jacob to leave. Therefore, Laban asks Jacob to stay with him, and since the previous arrangement of work for women is over, he tells Jacob to name your price. What does Jacob ask for? He wants to create his own separate group of animals for himself. Why would this make sense? A couple reasons. He's got himself, his wives, and his children, but what does he not really have? His own possessions. He has no way to actually support his family, because where is he going to get the food from? He's got to have his own herds, his own flocks, his own way to sustain himself if he is ever going to be an independent group. So he's thinking, well, Jacob is a very smart and very crafty individual for all the grief that we do give him. He's a very smart man. God has a lot to do with it as well, but he's thinking ahead. Verse 32 of chapter 30. This is his proposal. Let me, meaning Jacob, pass through your entire flock today, removing from there every speckled and spotted sheep and every black one from among the lambs and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and such shall be my wages. Now, it was the perception of the day that the purer animals were of a certain color. Sheep had to be white, white, goats had to be brown. That's what animals were supposed to be. Everything else was inferior in some way. Jacob says, I'm going to go through your flock. I'm going to pick out all of the inferior animals, the less valuable animals. I'm going to take those, and that's going to be my wages. And then to sweeten the deal, he throws in verse 33. So my honesty will answer for me later. When you come concerning my wages, everyone that is not speckled and not spotted from among the goats and black from among the lambs, if found with me, will be considered stolen. All right, so first of all, having one group of animals that look completely different from the other group of animals is a pretty good idea in this case, because if one doesn't belong with the other or is considered stolen, it's going to be pretty easy to tell. So they've got two distinct groups of animals. Now second, Jacob says if the wrong animal is found with this group, it can be considered stolen and that he's going to bear whatever harsh consequences there are. Now stealing animals, even in this country, up until recently, was a pretty big deal. What was the penalty for stealing cattle in the Old West? Yes, they caught you, you didn't last very long. Animals were the way that people survived, especially in the Old Testament age. So taking the livelihood of someone was a very serious offense. Now, I don't think that, death wasn't going to be in the cards for Jacob if an animal were found to be in the wrong place, but Jacob is saying that he takes this arrangement so seriously that he's not going to make excuses if it occurs, but he's going to pay whatever the financial penalty is required by Laban to make it right, no questions asked. So, pretty good deal. He has a logical way of separating the groups. He's kind of giving an insurance policy, saying if one is considered stolen, I'm not going to make excuses. I'm just going to pay whatever you want. We're going to make it right. Laban thinks, hey, this is a pretty good deal. His response is verse 34. Good. Let it be according to your word. Is this a good deal for Jacob? It's going to be, very much so. Let's look at some kind of livestock genetics. Chris? There we go. All right, so we got two groups, solid and speckled. Now this isn't 100% accurate, but it at least gives you kind of a generality of what's going to happen. If you have a white sheep and a white sheep that get together, they are going to produce, in all likelihood, a white sheep. If you have a speckled sheep and a speckled sheep that get together, they are going to produce a speckled sheep. All right, what's going to happen when a white sheep and a speckled sheep get together? Chris? A speckled. What happens when a speckled and a white sheep get together? All right, so how many of these outcomes result in white and how many outcomes result in speckled from two groups? Okay, that is your very general, basic sheep genetics. I know, it's very surface level, and I'm sure somebody can pick it apart, but that's generally what's going to happen. All right, what's that? All right, now Jacob, he understands what's going to happen because he's been a shepherd. He's been out in the fields for his entire life, which at this point is almost 100 years. He's been with animals. He's seen what happens. My suspicion is that Laban thinks of himself to be kind of above the shepherd class, and while he owns this group and is in charge of it all, he's not really been the one to be out in the field seeing what's going to happen. He doesn't know the animals the way that Jacob does. Jacob has seen multiple generations of these flocks. He knows how things work. Jacob is going to play Laban here pretty good. God's going to have a big part in it, but he is going to end up very well in the end. So Jacob, he first goes through and he separates all the animals. Now, Jacob certainly started out with less animals than what Laban had, because remember, the white sheep and the brown goats, those are the valuable ones. Those are the ones that they're going to keep around. Those are the ones they're going to protect. Probably going to eat the other ones more. So that's going to have a much larger group, but there are going to be some others that Jacob's going to get. He's going to start off with a small group. Verse 36 says that there's a 3 days journey between them. Now that was the start, but you got to remember that there's not nice green pastures with abundant water sources that they're just going to go stay in and never move. They're always going to be constantly moving around looking for fresh grass. They're going to be coming together frequently at wells to get water because you've got to have groups coming together likely to move what we saw as an example of a stone covering a well. That's where Jacob first met Rachel. So all of the groups had to come together, move the stone. The groups are naturally going to come together. So what's likely to happen when you get groups of male and female sheep mingling together at the same time? What's going to happen? Baby sheep. Yes, we understand how this works. Jacob took the natural way of things one step farther. If you look in verse 37, it tells us that he took some fresh pieces of poplar, almond, plane, that's a relative to sycamore tree, peeled the bark off of them, put them in the watering troughs. I don't know exactly how this worked, but apparently doing that put the sheep in a more, let's just say, loving mood. It's going to increase that chance to have baby sheep. I don't know if it was a chemical thing, if it was a sight thing, or if it was really God just telling Jacob to do something crazy so that I can have an excuse to, demonstrate my justice between Laban and Jacob. Don't really know how that worked. Either way, Laban's white sheep mated with Jacob's speckled sheep, and you get more speckled sheep. Jacob had the rights to all of the speckled sheep, so he would take them once they've been weaned from the mother, add them to his group. His group grows larger. Laban's group grows smaller. All right, so Jacob, he's encouraging the growth of the speckled population, but then he takes it even one step farther. He doesn't always, or randomly for that matter, put out these sticks or the rods. He only did it when the healthy and the strong group of sheep came around. What the Bible calls a feeble group, when it came around, Jacob says that he held back the rods, so that the end of chapter 30 tells us that Jacob's animals grew both in quantity and quality compared to Laban's group, and Jacob becomes very prosperous. How do you think Laban feels about this? Jealous, yes. He is gradually seeing the two flocks not only grow larger and smaller, but also much healthier and much weaker. Verse 1 and 2 of chapter 31. Now Jacob heard the words of Laban's son, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what belonged to our father he has made all his wealth. Jacob saw the attitude of Laban, and behold, it was not friendly toward him as formerly. Does Laban have any right to be upset here? No. He made the deal, although I guess there is something to be said by Jacob kind of knowing what's going to happen, and I guess there's some trickery involved there, but Jacob's not doing anything different from what he said he was going to do.
That's what he gets for giving the celebration.
Absolutely. God knows that the situation is deteriorating here. He knows that of all the injustice that's going on here with Laban taking advantage of Jacob. He knows that. And he tells Jacob to return to Canaan and that he's going to be with him. Sometimes you just wish that God would just give you that vision and say, I'm going to be with you. Wouldn't that be a great thing to experience in the New Testament age? I mean, he tells us right here. But to audibly, to physically have that verbal instruction from God saying, I'm going to be with you, I just think that would really brighten up your day. So he gets Leah and Rachel together. It doesn't say anything about Bilhah and Zilpah, but we know they're second-class wives anyway. And they have a little family meeting in verses 5 through 9. Jacob said to them, I see your father's attitude, that it is not friendly toward me as formerly. But the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. However, God did not allow him to hurt me. If he spoke thus, the speckled shall be your wages. Then all the flock brought forth speckled, and if he spoke, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock brought forth striped. Thus God has taken away your father's livestock and given them to me. So this absolutely answers Marie's question there of this is God providing justice to Jacob because of all what Laban has done to him. Now, Leah and Rachel, they're Laban's daughters. So what do you think their reaction is? Verses 14 through 16. Rachel and Leah said to him, "Do we have any portion or inheritance in our father's house? Are we not reckoned by him as foreigners? For he has sold us and has also entirely consumed our purchase price. Surely all the wealth which God has taken away from our father belongs to us and our children. Now then, do whatever God has said to you." They agree with their husband, like any good wife should, and they say that they've been sold to Jacob. What's the price? What was the price for each of the wives? 7 years of labor. That was what they were sold to Jacob for by Laban. They're holding a grudge as well. They agree to follow Jacob with whatever he thinks is best. Jacob decides to go back to Canaan with all of his possessions, but he doesn't do it immediately. He waits until Laban has gone to shear his sheep. Now, this is likely going to be a little bit of a trip. He's going to have to go out to wherever the flock, the herds are. He's going to be shearing the sheep, not at the quote-unquote homestead. Jacob sees the opportunity. As soon as Laban leaves, he gets his group together, and they start heading home. This gives Jacob a head start. However, before they leave, Rachel decides to do something. She sneaks into her father's house, and she steals her father's idols. These were likely little, small human representations, and it wasn't really uncommon for people of this time to have these so-called household idols. We don't really know the reason why she takes them. Could have been a few different thoughts that I found. Number one, maybe she worshiped these idols, didn't want to leave them behind. Maybe she's familiar with them. Maybe she believed that Laban was going to use their quote-unquote power the idols were going to help him catch up with them and find them. She might have wanted to use them as some kind of just bargaining power. Maybe Laban liked these things. She thought they were worthless, but maybe she wanted to have some insurance policy that she could trade with her father to get out of something. Or maybe they were just made of precious metals and she wanted the money. You don't really know, but whatever it is, she sneaks into her father's house. She takes these little idols before they leave. The Bible says it takes 3 days for Laban to find out that Jacob and his daughters have left, but he immediately gathers his men and they take off in pursuit, and after 7 days, they catch up. Now, if you think about it, this means that Jacob is moving pretty good because what does he have? Large flocks of animals, lots of kids, probably servants, baggage. He's taking everything with him. He's moving pretty quick if it's going to take 7 days for Laban to catch up, because remember what he's traveling with. Just his men, pretty light and pretty fast. So Jacob is moving at a pretty good clip. The race is on, and I think I am going to stop right there, because that's a decent stopping point. Okay. Thoughts, comments, questions? I see people stretching. I'm sorry. Nothing? No, what's next week? Who's next week? Adam's ignored me.
I'm sorry. Tom Weber.
Tom Weber is leading this next week, so I'm looking forward to that. But next time I teach, we will pick right up with the race between Laban and Jacob. All right, nothing else? Mike, do you mind closing us out in prayer? Go ahead.
Let's pray. God in heaven, thank you for the opportunity to come and worship you, to learn lessons that we may not have ever dug into even before, when it's really eye-opening to look at the history and to know that these are real family situations. It's kind of odd for us to look back at, but in your plan, this is how things have to work out. Thank you for Adam for bringing forth the lesson, and I pray that we'll all be safe as we head out and go home, and be with everyone on the prayer list, that people have the right mindset and know that your will is being done and your plan is being worked out. In Jesus' name.
Amen. Have a good evening.